What are the best arguments against legalizing marijuana? Here are some of the arguments that I'm aware of. I make no judgment on how strong the argument is. The science is inconclusive on the health effects of prolonged use of cannabis via smoking. Criminal enterprises will set up legal shops and use the legally gotten money to finance illegal activities. Making it legal will give children the impression that its use is safe and okay, even though studies have shown that young teens experience various setbacks from using marijuana. There is no reliable way to prevent users from driving while impaired or to measure drivers suspected of being impaired. Legalization of recreational use diminishes, somehow, the ability of medical users to legitimize their use, or some variation of this argument. Isn't that one of the ones used to defeat legalization in California in the 2010 election on Prop 19? Legalization would lead to a surge in use, compounding already high rates of substance use problems. Again, not saying that any of these are good arguments, just that they are arguments against legalizing. Criminal enterprises will set up legal shops and use the legally gotten money to finance illegal activities. Doesn't that apply to all legal means of acquiring money, though? Legalization of recreational use diminishes, somehow, the ability of medical users to legitimize their use. I think the argument on that one is that if you make marijuana into the new beer, as some billboards from pro-legalization types have pushed for, then people taking it medicinally will be mocked/ridiculed/teased as being in it just for the free beer. It's not a strong argument, but it kinda holds water. If alcohol had medicinal uses, I suspect we'd crack jokes at the expense of those being treated with it, saying they were just after an excuse to get drunk. Pretty valid points depending on one's point of view. The first one, however, seems rather inconsequential. After all, we already know the detrimental effects of tobacco smoking, and it remains a pretty major industry. Of course, I'm sure that has a lot to do with the fact that it was such an established thing before the adverse effects were widely known. Correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge there is no good field sobriety test for marijuana to test drivers with. And since it stays in your system for so long, I wouldn't think a blood test would not be a good option either, as it could potentially result in false positives, wouldn't necessarily tell you the person is high at the time of being stopped. While you can argue that this problem exists with it being illegal, you could also argue that legalizing it might exacerbate it. That being said, I'm not against the legalization, I just also don't want people driving around me that are high, just like I don't want people driving around me that are drunk. I have this fear that one day the government will try to let cigarette companies manufacture marijuana for recreational consumption. No thanks. But all that said, I live in a state with legal marijuana and it seems to be working out just fine. In my teenage years, I smoked an awful lot of pot first thing in the morning until last thing at night. I left school at 15 and moved in with a small-time pot dealer. Neither of us worked, we just sat around playing computer games and smoking pot. I did try to go back to college, but couldn't study because we shared a room, and it's hard to study when there are 4 or 5 stoners playing GTA or FIFA. After a couple of years, my short-term memory was shot. I had fainting spells, insomnia, and I was extremely paranoid. I started having anxiety attacks. I quit smoking pot and moved back in with my dad. I got a job and knuckled down, and I'm great now. A lot of my friends still smoke it, but I've not touched it in 10 years. I still like to roll a joint though. So, my view, and I'm not saying it's the best view, is that marijuana can be addictive in more of a habitual, mental sense than physical, and I believe that taken in large quantities, it can damage your mental health. And marijuana being illegal didn't prevent any of this. That's the problem with prohibition. It doesn't work. Might as well make it legal and deal with it properly instead of making it illegal and swipe all the problems under the rug. The only reason I started smoking pot was because it was easier to buy than alcohol. My local dealer didn't care I was underage, unlike the beer store. Let's talk about this in business terms. It's all just about money and power at this point. If you think about it, what we have here in real life could be nothing more than the free market classically at work. The consumer wants a product and a market is made for the product. Even if it isn't legal, there's an entire global industry built around it already. Part of this market involves government regulation, the whole being a legal thing. Businesses still find ways around it all, money laundering / government loopholes / friends in high places / murder / extortion / etc. And it still gets to the consumer, who pays what the market will actually bear. The only problem I see is that a lot of people will lose money and power if it were legalized. More people will obviously be growing it at the beginning, and then the most efficient and market-bearing methods of distribution and consumption will eventually happen. Pure capitalism. This is the real reason, but I have yet to hear a prohibitionist ever articulate it.